Okay. Then I'm going to turn it over to Linda Piccone. She has been a longtime member of the history group and also worked with Peg. You were an editor at the Star Tribune. So.
Okay, I'm Linda Piccone. I was lucky enough to meet Peg Meier 50 years and 3 days ago when I started work at the Minneapolis Tribune. But this is not about me, as interesting as I am. Peg graduated from the University of Wisconsin, went to work as a reporter at the paper in Sheboygan, which I learned today was the bratwurst capital of the world. But the paper, unfortunately, folded fairly quickly after starting in 1970. And she was then recruited by the Minneapolis Tribune. She was what we call a GA reporter, a general assignment reporter, who did everything. But she says, and I'll trust her on this, she was not good at cops or fires or those emergency kind of things. In the 1980s, she became a reporter on what was then the Neighbors section of the paper, a section that looked at ordinary people and their lives. In about 1980, she proposed doing a book about Minnesota history. Chuck Bailey, then the editor of the Minneapolis Tribune, said it sounded like a good idea. So she got a grant from the Minnesota Historical Society to cover her salary and expenses. She took a leave from the newspaper, and she set to work on pulling together letters, samples of text, photos, and more that would become Bring Warm Clothes, which was first published in 1981. She continued working at the Minneapolis Tribune, which became the Star Tribune in 1982, until she retired in 2006. In retirement, she's put together several books and done research for the Minnesota History Theater. Her books include Too Hot, Went to Lake, Through No Fault of My Own, A Girl's Diary of Life on Summit Avenue in the Jazz Age, which was also made into a production at the Minnesota History Theater. Coffee Made Her Insane, The Last of the Tea Room Ladies, Wishing for a Snow Day, Growing Up in Minnesota, and there is a video version of Bring Warm Clothes done by Twin Cities Public Television, available online if you want to look for that. Now I want to switch gears just a little bit here and tell you that people go into journalism for a lot of different reasons, particularly newspaper journalism. Some want to change the world. Some want to be where the action is in politics and government and sports. Some want to win awards. Some like the fast pace of a newsroom, of a daily newspaper. Peg went into journalism because she liked talking to people about what's important to them. Their lives, their jobs, their families, their friends, their hopes and dreams, and their fears and challenges. Although we too often learn history as a collection of dates and trends and analyses, history is about people. Some of them important, most of them ordinary folks just trying to live decent lives a day at a time. Bring Warm Clothes shows us just how interesting and funny and sad and profound those folks can be.
I had a whole bunch of things to tell you about Linda, but she was very nice in that introduction. So she's very nice and very smart, and we had a lot of fun working together over the years. A lot of fun. It was a wonderful job for a long time, and then it wasn't. So it's all good. Let me tell you just a little bit about the book. People were asking back at the book's headquarters. This book, I started this book when I was still in my 20s, and now I'm pushing 80, so it's been around a while. The first version came out in 1981, and the Tribune published it. Someone at the Historical Society, where I was finding all this stuff, said, well, how many are you going to publish? And I said, I think they're thinking of 10,000. She practically fainted. She said, we never publish more than 1,000 at a time. So we were sold out by Christmas. It was available in October, just sold out. And that's because there wasn't anything like this. Most history is written for people who want the details, the dates, the people's names, and what I wanted was interesting stories about regular people. So I would get a box from the archives. I couldn't use pen. I couldn't take out more than one folder at a time. And things have changed. At card catalog, anybody remember card catalogs? It didn't look at a screen. It was completely different. But it was a lot of fun, and just going through people's stuff. There was a man researching at the same time I was looking for this, and he was going to write a biography of Hubert Humphrey. And he took out one file at a time, read every page, every word, and then maybe would get through half a box during his time at the Historical Society that day. And I'd pull out a folder and say, nah. And every once in a while I'd say, hey, everybody, you won't believe what I just found. This is a treasure hunt. I love this. So that worked well for me. Then that book started looking pretty old. I mean, a book from 1981 that was long and narrow. Who remembers the old book? Yeah, some of you, a lot of you. Booksellers said nobody wanted it anymore. It was looking pretty brown and rumpled. And the Historical Society, bless their little hearts, decided to republish it in this nifty way. Different size, different paper, different size font, shot every picture again. So they really made it pretty. I can't believe what good work they did. So I want to tell you first about a woman named Mary Carpenter. I'm going to point out some of the people in this book. There are hundreds of people in this book, but here's some. In 1871, there was a woman named Mary Carpenter, 30 years old, married to a Rochester area farmer. And she wrote to her cousin Laura in August, listing what she had done the day before. And Mary wrote, my hand is so tired, perhaps you'll excuse penciling. I'll tell you what I did yesterday. I am too tired to write, but may have to delay a long time if I wait till I'm rested. You see, we're in the midst of harvesting, the great drive of the year. Now, for what I did yesterday, I got up before 4 o'clock, got breakfast for the hired man, skimmed milk, churned, worked over the churning already at hand, did a large washing, baked 6 loaves of bread, 7 pumpkin pies. While I was baking, put on the irons and did the ironing and got supper, made the beds, sweeping, and my daughter was not well, so she didn't help me as much as usual. I was tired and lame enough at night and feel miserable in consequence today. So you see, I am giving you the dregs in writing. We are nearly through the cutting of grain, but it all has to be stacked and threshed. That's more than I do in a month. And I like it my way, better than her way. She was just incredible. There aren't any children here tonight, so I can read you the part about sex. This is from a book that was found in Minnesota. It wasn't published here, but somehow it got here. Published in 1875 in New York, and it's all about sex, but it starts slowly. Chapter 1 is vegetable reproduction. But then it goes on to quite frank discussions about venereal disease and masturbation, both of which were thought to result in eternal damnation and deformed children. So here's an example of some of the milder passages. She wrote, another and important sign of pregnancy, and the one most to be relied on, is, do we have any doctors here who can tell the first sign of pregnancy? It is an increase in the size of the neck. This often occurs at a very early period, and many females, by keeping a careful daily measurement of the neck, can always tell when they're pregnant. Tell this to your great-granddaughters, okay? Generally, the best age to marry when health is perfect is between 21 and 25 in the male and 18 to 21 in the female. As a general rule, marriages earlier than that are injurious and detrimental to health. Men who marry too young become partially bald, dim of sight, and lose all elasticity of limb in just a few years. Looks like it happened, huh? And women in a like position rarely have any bloom on their cheek or fire in their eye by the time they're 25. So, different views. Now I'll tell you about Sam Bloomer. Sam lived in Stillwater, young man, very young, and he got signed up to fight with the Northern Army, of course, and got into, against his will, but what can you do, the Battle of Antietam. And I'm sure some of the historians out there know about that, but he was injured. He had saved all the letters coming to him, and I don't know how long it took to get from Minnesota down south, but he kept them all carefully, and they're at the Historical Society. And one of the wonderful librarians directed me to these letters, and something was changing, I could tell. First of all, it was letters to him from the girls in Stillwater talking about how brave he was and who was getting married in Stillwater and who had a baby and all the local news. But then things shifted. And I said to the librarian, what's going on? And she said, did you see Sam Bloomer's diary? I said, no, I didn't know it was here. Well, she got me this little thing. It's this wide and this tall. He had taken 2 pieces of cardboard, ripped up paper to make pages for this diary, and hand sewed the binding together so he could get this home safely, and he did. But here's what he wrote on September 18th, 1860, one already? 2. During the night, I slept considerable and was awake at daybreak by the noise in my head and found a secesh, S-E-C-E-S-H, secession guy, a Southern guy, pulling at my canteen stopper, which he wished to take. I laid on the same spot all day, and my partner's dead body lay in sight of me all that time. About 6 o'clock, a secesh came with a stretcher and took me up to a barn and took me up to one of his men. What had happened, he was shot in the leg. September 20th, this day will long be remembered by me. For about 8 o'clock a.m., the doctors put me on the table and amputated my right leg above the knee, and from thence suffering commenced in earnest. Well, no kidding. There's no anesthesia, no nothing, just he was amazing, and I got back to see my friends after I found this, and I was all excited about Sam Bloomer and blah, blah, blah. And one of them, Elena Piccone, wherever you are, it was Elena, said, well, who cares? You know, this was in the 1800s. You don't know him. Why do you care at all about this soldier? And I said, well, it's an amazing story. And she said, I'm not interested. But I found it very interesting. And he served in Indiana and Maine with one leg until December of 1865. Got back to Stillwater. He had 4 children, lost his wife, remarried, and lived to age 82. He outlived 3 of his 4 children and became mayor of Stillwater. He's an important character there. If you go to their county historical society, you can learn more about Sam. Yeah. Okay, anybody interested in baseball out there? I'm going to tell you how a dead man won a baseball game. So this was before the turn of the last century, and there were 2 crack semi-pro baseball teams from Minnesota. And one was from Wilmer, and one was from Benson. And people came from hundreds of miles away to see this ball game. And it tells in great detail who hit, where everybody was on the base, the whole schmear. I won't bother you with that, but the crowd roaring. Then Thielman, he was with the Wilmer team, the pitcher, utterly exhausted by the tension of the tight game, had pitched 10 innings, gritted his teeth, and ran as fast as he could. He touched second base and legged it for third, with O'Toole's spikes pounding after him. Benson's outfield had not yet retrieved the ball. Thielman rounded third and then collapsed. O'Toole rounded the base close behind. Unable to pass him on the home stretch, O'Toole picked him up and carried him, throwing him across home base ahead of his own touch. Until then, it hadn't been discovered that Thielman was dead of a heart attack. But stranger than that, the umpire allowed both runs, giving the game to Wilmer and making this the only baseball game on record won by a dead man. However, a lot of howevers in history. That's a nice story, but it's not true. The story was a figment of the imagination of a Candy, Ohio County railroad man and an umpire. They sent it out on the telegraph wire and told it so many times that people all over the state believed it. And for decades, the Historical Society has gotten, I don't think it's true anymore, but got inquiries about the baseball game won by a dead man. So there we go. And on the page next to it, here's a juicy true story. In 1903, the county of Marshall County made posters that they hung all over town about wanted people. I can't imagine there were that many wanted people at the same time, but there was. And when I was digging through them at the Historical Society, I found one for a man wanted for bastardy, B-A-S-T-A-R-D. That means he got somebody pregnant. And this says he was 5 feet 9 inches, 38 or 39 pounds, age 38 or 39. The weight was 150 to 160, dark hair, mustache, fair complexion, has one stiff, crooked finger. He's a shoemaker and harness maker by trade. Well, that's all I knew about Adolf Franzen. And I wasn't expecting to get a letter the first year that this book came out in 1981. It was from the daughter of Adolf Franzen. The mother had never heard the story about her father. And at Christmas time, when she was given a copy of this book for a Christmas present, and it was her birthday, she's looking through the book, and one of the younger relatives flips it open to page 240 and says, isn't this your father? So that woman's daughter wrote to me and said, here's what happened. Yeah, it was her father, and he did get a girl, like 15 or 16, pregnant, skipped back to Sweden, changed his mind, went back to this county, married the woman, had a whole batch of children in those days, boom, 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 boom. And the one whose birthday it was on Christmas was the youngest, and nobody had ever told her this story. She was quite amazed. But I guess the older ones all, by this time probably joked about Dad and the whole works. Then the letter from the birthday girl's daughter ended, other than that, it's a nice book. So you never know what kind of news you're going to break. Yeah. Another baseball story showing how different some days were earlier. This is from 1890. This book has material from when the natives were carving on the rocks way early, all the way up through World War II. But this one's 1890, and it was in a Minneapolis Danish and Norwegian newspaper. Maybe you know that the ethnic groups created their own newspapers and books and everything else. So this has all undergone a lot of translation. But this one, it says, the leading citizens of St. Cloud played baseball last Sunday. This violation of the Sunday law so angered some of the ardent church people that they made a list of those who participated in the game, as well as the attending fan when they should have been in church. The list includes the mayor, the chief of police, the county attorney, the chief of the fire department, most of the aldermen, and 40 of the leading business and professional men of St. Cloud. They are now to be arrested and charged with violating the Sunday law. The only thing that troubles the collective minds of the law enforcing this church rule is who is going to do the arresting and prosecuting. Now that's probably true, Then Sarah Christie, one of my favorites, she was a young woman, a lot of older brothers, really wanted to be a teacher, wanted a good education, which was difficult in her day. This is 1870s. And she wanted to get her dad to let her go to college. And she started in Appleton, Wisconsin at Lawrence University. But, she didn't get very far. Times were tough. And her dad kept saying, you don't need this education, leave it to your brothers. Come on home. And she wrote back to Dad, you speak of algebra as being a masculine attainment. I cannot see that any more than it is a feminine attainment. Now, I cannot see how it is that men will think that they are any better fitted for the duties of life than women, and their powers are stronger. They think they are a little bit more elevated and look at everything from a higher place and are, in fact, a few inches taller. But it is to them to keep women where they are. It is the education which a woman gets and the false ideas that are crammed into their heads that keep women where they are. Now, I believe the weakness of women lies in their education. They have the same powers given them that is given to man. And if they were cultivated and strengthened in the same way and in the same direction, women would be just as able to make her way through life as man. To be sure, there would be a great many who could not, but let each have a fair trial, and those who are not able for it, let them fall back to their old place. It really makes me vexed when you say algebra was a masculine attainment. And there's a lot of stuff like that, people fighting for education, so it breaks my heart to see so many kids these days who don't want to go to school. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Here's a sad one. Get ready. This is from a diary. Oh, I love that when I'd open one of the boxes with stuff in, and there'd be a diary. What can be more fun than reading somebody else's diary? This was Edward Drew, a farmer near Winona. Thursday, March 5th, 1886. Hauled one load of wood. Bundy came over and got me to Winona to get a load of lumber for him. It begins to rain soon after we leave town. Next day, Friday, 6 March. Hauled 8 loads of firewood, very poor sleighing. I went first last night and going again today. Nicholas chops up trees to help me load. Saturday, March 7th. I am compelled to chronicle here the saddest event of my life. Nothing could have happened to me that would have been more so. My wife was taken sick about midnight. That phrase was often used for delivering a baby. and it is here because the next line is, about 6 o'clock, her child was born. About 9 o'clock, she died. The poor child is alive and well. Oh, what a day. What is this world to me now? Were it not for my poor, helpless, motherless child, I don't know. They must be taken care of. Next day, Sunday, March 8th, lonely, lonely day, dreary for me. March 9th, Monday, following the dear wife to her grave today. Funeral appointed at 10 o'clock, sermon by Reverend Mr. Dudley. Text was St. John 11:3, Lord, behold him whom thou lovest is sick. Thaws very much, looks like spring now, sleighing gone, so the wagons will have to be used. And then back to farming. Back to farming. By Tuesday the 10th, hauled big load of corn to the yard. Nicholas hauls it. I overhaul the harness and shoulders again this time. Cut up the meat, get old meat out of the cellar, dreary time. Wednesday, March 11th, spring has come. I hear the prairie chickens for the first time. At least people wrote things down in those days. What's going to happen to all our messages online one way or another? Years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I suggested to a group, maybe somebody should save every 1 millionth email for the historian someday. Boy, did people get mad at me. You know, what if it's my email? What if it's something that I don't want the whole world to know? So I quickly gave up on that idea, but yeah. 186, we have ads for medicine. Warner's Safe Medicine. I don't see that. That must be a wrong page number, I'm sorry. A lot of those in the old newspapers. Almost as much fun as the diaries were the old newspapers. And when I first started on this book, decades ago, people at the History Center would let me look at the real newspapers, the crinkly stuff. But paper in those days was so much better than what we have now that those papers were holding up really well. You know, if you leave your Star Tribune on the porch for a day, it's really crinkly and yellow and awful and small. It keeps getting smaller and smaller, but I still love it. I have to read it every day. But the ads are amazing. It was hard for me to leave after a day of looking at ads because all this, you know, health, important to us, very important to them too. Livers, who did the liver pills? Anybody remember? I'm not sure. Carter's little liver pills could cure about everything, or so they thought. Some sad stories, some really glad stories. Here's a picture somebody might remember. This got in the first edition of the book. $3.35. It's a bunch of people in a tavern sitting at the bar. Does that look familiar to anybody? Somebody must have watched Cheers in the old days. This was on the intro to Cheers, and somebody from Hollywood called me up and she said, "Can I use this picture for a TV pilot we're doing?" And I said, "It's not mine, it's Library of Congress, anybody can use it." And it's been on ever since, so look for this picture. One of the disappointments of the time when I was looking for this stuff is the historical societies were primarily preserving white people's stuff. And can't blame them. People of color didn't want to give their stuff there because they weren't sure how it would be taken care of, it would be preserved, what would be made of it. So mostly everything at the historical societies is white people. And I looked for others, but the pickings were rare. And I'm glad to report that's changed now. A lot more groups and peoples are represented in the collections. So that is quite changed. But the fun part was just the sense of discovery. Here comes another box. Will there be anything in it or not? And often not. And I think RT was working at the newspaper when we got a title for this book. Bring Warm Clothes is perfect, even though it wasn't a cold winter. But the editor wanted me to call it a phrase that was in one of the old letters. Come and settle in this beautiful country. How many books would have sold with that title? No, not really. And one of the guys, Joe Rhodes, came up with Bring Warm Clothes, which is in one of the letters. A young woman was going to move from down here up north, I think near Ely, to work as a teacher. And a friend of hers who was urging her to go up north wrote, bring warm clothes because 30 below can feel pretty cold. So she did, and luckily her letters were saved. And I'd like to hear from you people too. What are you saving? What are you getting rid of? What's your family history? Can anybody tell me something? We're not going to be shy now, are we? We are? Who has a story? Okay.
Just to get it started, actually, our mother died about a year ago. She was a saver, saved every single thing. And it is very difficult to figure out what is important to my mother, who is no longer here, and us who are here. And I don't have anything decided on that, but one of the things that's really difficult is saying, why do we save these things? And do we save a memento that meant a great deal to someone no longer here because of the memory of that? I don't know whether that's common for anyone else, but it's certainly something I'm wrestling with at the moment.
And where are you keeping everything? Not in a wet basement, I hope.
It's in a place that my wife would prefer that it not be forever.
Middle of the living room is what I'm guessing. I'll tell about a little girl if I should continue. When I was looking for material, this is not in this book, it comes into another book and in this book. I wanted something about children, and I was directed to a diary of a little girl who lived on Summit Avenue in St. Paul. Anybody know where she lived? She lived in what is now the governor's residence. Her daddy, a lumberman, grew tremendously wealthy and built that beautiful house. And so all her anecdotes, everything she did that was being a naughty girl, takes place there or in her school, which is Summit School. And she got a blank diary in 1926 and kept her handwritten diary all of 1927, and it's really fun to follow her. And we don't know if she ever did that again. The handwritten diary was the only one that ever existed. And I got to see a copy of that. The original was gone. The family, unfortunately, threw away the one written with pencil and pen and typed it up. And they say this is the way it was. But, there might have been some small changes. That's the one I found. And I said, oh, this is too good just for a little segment to be in a book somewhere. Got to get the whole thing published. And the University of Minnesota Press published it. Well, she just turned 13. She was in love. Her name is Coco Irvin. In St. Paul, there were two prominent families, both spelled I-R-V-I-N-E. Her family was Irvin. The other family's family was Irvine, as in Irvine Park. Okay, this is Irvine, very important to know. You might be quizzed later. I'm going to dancing school tonight. I hope he will be there. And anytime she wrote about her love at this point, had a capital H, hoping he will be there. Later, he danced with everyone but me. That's a very good sign, because even though he didn't dance with me, he looked at me 3 times. I had fun with Charlie. This was a little teenager who was close to her. They were not boyfriend, girlfriend. Charlie told me this joke, which I find humorous. A dog went across the railroad track and a train ran over his tail. He looked back to see where his tail was, and a train came the other way and cut off his head. Moral of the story, don't lose your head over a little piece of tail. She didn't get it. I danced 3 times with Charlie, 6 times with Bobby, 4 times with George, blah, blah, blah. So 2 days later, Sunday, January 9th, she writes, I am in deep trouble through no fault of my own. That's the name of the book, Through No Fault of My Own. She says this quite a bit. I told that funny joke at the dinner table. Imagine the governor's residence, long table, fancy chairs. Daddy took great exception to the joke, and I said as plaintively as possible, what's wrong with it? And Daddy, in a most emphatic way, said, it is not a good joke for a child your age, and please don't repeat it. But what does it mean? I asked, ignoring his reference to my childhood, which, if he had any brains at all, he would see as a thing of the past. He said feebly, looking at Mother, well, it just means going on a little party. There is something more to that than just this. What's wrong with that? I mean to find out. So a little bit later, I'm in the worst trouble I've ever been in, still through no fault of my own. I cannot understand it. Daddy and Mother were going to a dinner party. They were all dressed up. So I yelled over the banister, where are you going? Is it to get a little piece of tail? Daddy grew thunderously angry and came up the steps 2 at a time, and he actually shook me. I was grievously hurt and went to my room and locked the door. What can it all mean? Wait till I see that Charlie, of all the nerve. Well, she goes through the year, and the last page tells she never did figure out that joke. So when I first found the book, I went across the street where there were 2 twins who were, 10, 12, something like that, boy, girl. And I said, do you get this joke? And they said, no. So I think it's a joke that is funny to our age, but not to a whole lot more. So they did a whole lot of treacherous things, she and her brothers. One was he got a radio set where he could broadcast into a microphone-like thing, and he even got it hooked up to the radio downstairs where her parents were. And her brother announced falsely that the president had been assassinated. So this very important man, Mr. Irvin, called the bank, called everybody, and then he found out that it was Charlie who did this. So what a kid. What a kid. Any questions? Yes?
I was curious to know, you had mentioned they brought you another box. Oh, thank you. They brought you another box, which you were very excited about to open and see what was inside. I wondered, how did they choose the boxes to bring you, or how did you choose them?
Well, you remember card catalogs?
Yes.
That's all that I would look up on one of the card catalogs, childhood, and copy down the box numbers. Then I had to present it to a librarian who would go into the huge room to find that box, bring it back. It usually took half an hour or so. And then they'd bring me the box to look through because I wasn't able to say, bring me something funny or bring me something tragic or bring me something that would stir the hearts of readers someday. So it was just a matter of going through, and it's all very personal. If you were doing this, you would pick entirely different things, perhaps. And
So for, say, the farmer, was that from a farmer box?
I'm sorry.
So for the farmer story and his wife, was that from a farmer box or from a
It
town
was
box?
his name. It was under his name. And it said farmer, and it might, this was so long ago, I'm pretty fuzzy, but it might have said threshed and lost his wife and baby born, maybe, but maybe not. But I just went through a lot of boxes to find things I liked.
And are you still able to march in there and yell children and they'll bring you the things?
It's different, of course. Now you find it on the computer. The society isn't open as many hours for researchers as it had been. It's much more regular. It's more like the insurance business, kind of like newspapers. It used to be, yeah. Now newspaper offices look more and act more like, business ventures. So thought of another one I'd like to tell you. Did you want to talk?
No, thank you very much.
I was looking for letters specifically from children during the Depression. There were many letters about farmers who had gone broke, asking for help. So many, even just to the governor of the state, Floyd B. Olson, you all know that highway, saying, can you help us? We're down to nothing. Our children are hungry. Just pitiful stuff in those boxes. I was looking for one from a child and found one from a little girl named June Oberg. I don't have that letter with me now, but she wrote to the governor that she was 9, living in Two Harbors, Minnesota, and she wrote to the governor that there was a little girl in her school, a kindergarten girl, who had nothing and who was beaten at home, clearly abused. What could the governor do for this little girl? Well, most of the letters that I found in that group had the governor's answer stapled, not Xerox, what did we call those in those days? Yeah, a mimeograph of the letter that he wrote and sent it, attached it, or his secretary did, to the letters, and most of them said, I'm so sorry, there's nothing I can do, it's terrible times, bless you, blah, blah, blah. This one had nothing attached to it, but it had her address at the top of the letter, and of course, Two Harbors, and Oberg, that's a pretty familiar name up north, Oberg Mountain and everything up on the North Shore. So I was determined I was going to find June Oberg, whatever happened to June Oberg. And I went through birth certificates, death certificates. I found out that her father was a railroad man, and they moved to various places in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So it was in her later years of, early teens that they were in Two Harbors. So I was getting nowhere doing all the history stuff. So I sent a letter the same letter to newspapers in Duluth and Two Harbors saying, I'm a historian looking for a little girl named June Oberg in such and such a date during the Depression. And can anybody help me? Well, within a couple days, I got a letter back from a woman who had gone to school with June Oberg, still kept in touch, knew that she was living in Missouri with her jeweler husband, knew that they raised children, and I don't remember what time of year this was, but she had heard from June at Christmas. Hey, I'm gonna find her. So that was a Friday when I opened that letter, and I thought, well, it's getting kind of late, I better wait until the next day. So I called Saturday morning, and her husband answered, and I asked to speak to her. by that point, I knew the name of the man she'd married. And he said, what do you want? And I said, well, I found an amazing letter she wrote as a little girl, and I'd like to find out more about it. And he said, oh, I'm very sorry you missed her by just a few months. She had just died. And he had never heard of that letter. He didn't know that girl's name. The children had never heard about June writing this letter. It was just gone. And I really wish I could have talked to her. And she was a teacher for a few years before she married, and I bet she was a really sympathetic, wonderful, kind teacher. But, you know, you just get there, and it was just a little bit too late. So disappointing. It's exciting. You can do this too. It's very exciting. Questions? I can't believe there aren't questions. Really? It's a good, nosy group. There we go.
One more comment you were asking, just to tack on to what he was saying about getting rid of parent stuff. So my dad passed away just a few years ago here, and he had actually I'm from Boston area, and he moved out here when he was 85. He jumped in his little camper and drove out. After he got here, I found out he had filled his little his little camper with all kinds of things for me. So he couldn't rest on the way. He'd lean against a tree and take little naps at the rest areas, and then he got and had all my furniture piled in the back. So yeah, so here he was at 85. But anyway, make a long story longer. After he passed away, you know, I went through this giant bureau of all the stuff he had wanted to go through with me, but never had the opportunity. And I find that I have trouble. We downsized to a condo. I couldn't get rid of any of that stuff. And what's interesting to me is the stuff that I have, for example, my wedding dress, I was quick to donate it. This is my wedding dress. That's over here. Take it. Whereas my mother's dress has such stories attached to it. During the war, she practiced making it out of cotton because silk was so expensive and all these things, and I cannot part with these beautiful things.
Yeah.
Yet my wedding dress, it's like an 80s dress with the giant things. Get out of here, right? But I wonder, like, if my ancestors be like, oh, if I could have only seen Aunt Peggy's poofy 80s dress. And I wonder if anyone else I've always wondered, is anyone else like that? Like, oh, here's my junk.
Oh, that's what's going to happen for all of us. And we have memories of certain things and certain people, and we try to pass on those memories in our family or with friends. And after a couple generations, yeah, the stories are gone and the items are gone. If you can, write down a few stories for your descendants. It wouldn't have to be your children, just anybody. That would be fantastic because everything is being lost. We don't write letters. We don't draw pictures for each other. Peter?
This would not be news to anyone in the room, but we're all going through, or will be, silverware.
Yeah.
The next generation does not want our silverware. I don't know what's going to happen to all the silverware in the world.
Yeah.
And China.
And China. Yeah. I have two great nieces, and they said, anybody want my mother's china? And one of them said, yeah, I'd take it. So little by little, I've taken it to her, and she might be tossing it. Or I said, it's up to you. I don't care. Sell it if you can. Store it away for someday. I don't know what, I just want it out. And I want it out to someone who might care.
Addressing the wedding dress, it reminds me of, when I was growing up, we thought of World War II, our parents in World War II. And now we hear all this discussion about the Vietnam War, which, to some of us, it doesn't seem that long ago. And so I think there's a thing about having enough time go by. Your wedding dress was still too new, It just takes more time. It doesn't solve the problem of what to do with stuff, though. I mean, we have a whole, where's my husband? We have our, my parents, his parents, our stuff, and it's really a struggle at this point.
Just so it's not in a plastic laundry bag, dry cleaner bag. That's about the worst thing. for. Yeah, but what's going to happen to all this stuff? A few pieces get into historical societies or museums, you know, the really good stuff or the really ordinary stuff, and they'll pick one and put it in. But I think the young people are smart to collect all this. They don't need 3 sets of dishes. And artwork, you know, they put something in and get sick of that and put in another print. I think that's kind of smart. I think we all get tired. We may say we revere this stuff because it was family, but really we just get used to it. So maybe they're right, but I can't get rid of enough. It's just too much. Luckily, I moved 5 years ago out, but still too much. I'd advocate you all move tomorrow. Get rid of it. So, anybody? What time is it?
Just a question about researching at the History Center. I know the newspapers, you can get them online and they are word searchable back to the middle of the 1800s. But are those letters and things at the History Center scanned and word searchable?
Some of the things are, especially the things of value, like Alexander Ramsey, the first territorial governor, his letters and everything are on microfilm. Microfilm makes me exhausted. It's so hard to look at and so small, and God, this light. It's difficult, I find, to work with it. But I'm older now, too. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't have to do that anymore. But I should have mentioned that I started with the newspapers on paper. They're not on paper anymore. They're all microfilmed. And it's still fun to put in a roll. You know, put in a roll from Buffalo, Minnesota, and see what the ads were from those days and who traveled to the city to see a nephew so-and-so. You know, all that stuff is in there, and it's fascinating, but it's hard to pick out things that you think are really great. I was a lot younger when I did that. I could spend a day there and just be fascinated, and then go find people and say, guess what I found today? This is so good.
Actually, the newspapers are now online,
Yeah,
so
you can get it at home.
easily, if you have the proper access to do it, and it's much easier than microfiche.
Yeah, that microfiche is hard on the eyes and hard on the head. But they're making progress on all these things. But what do they keep? The Historical Society officials always say, we are not the attic of Minnesota. You know, don't bring us the junk you don't want in your attic. So they've become very selective of what they'll choose and what they'll say. Take this home, would you please? But some of the, you never know what's going to be valuable. In the days I was working there trying to find things for this book or others, there was a distinguished guy there in suit and tie and everything. He looked like he would not do any harm on earth. Well, he was stealing Indian maps in the early days when the Indians described to the settlers, to the soldiers, where the paths were to get somewhere. Somebody would get it down on paper. And he was stealing them and could make a lot of money doing that. And finally they figured it out. But they said, we don't trust anybody. You know, you can't trust anybody because who knows what people want. And I said, I'm just using my pencil. And you know, you kind of want to walk around like you are in Target, hands up. I'm not taking anything. Target drives me crazy.
One of the things that surprises me so much is how little so many of us know about even our grandparents or our great-grandparents or whatever. And I found out as an adult that one of my relatives was the first woman to get a medical degree at the University of Minnesota. And there was a scholarship for any of us relatives, but I found out way too late to make any use of it. And I have yet to find out what if it would have really helped me if it was a large scholarship, but just that she had done that and that she wanted to serve the United States, but they wouldn't let her because she was a woman. So she went to France to serve there in the war, and was involved in like eye research and all this stuff. And she lived in St. Paul, and it was like just kind of. Did you find that that's pretty common for a lot of families, that we just don't know much about anything beyond our grandparents, maybe, or?
That's right. We just don't know, partly because the immigrants, no matter where from, were not too happy weren't treated well, a lot of groups. So they dropped the language if they could for their children, and their clothing and some of the cooking, some of the recipes. They just wanted to be regular Americans, and for good reason in those days. But so much of everything has been lost. I thought, if you have another 3 minutes, do you have another 3 minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Nobody says yes. Okay.
Yes.
So I've been able to contribute ideas or worked on 7 plays at the History Theater. And I just went to see Wasn't me. The former director of the History Museum said, okay, you can come over and give me your idea. You really should give it to the new guy. But I said, no, I think you should write this play. There was a woman named Gracia Countryman who was very influential in Minneapolis in the first couple decades of the last century. And she was one of the few women librarians, head librarians in a major city. She introduced bookmobiles, probably the first ones in the country. She decided if people can't get to libraries, she would take books to them. So she put books in firehouses, police stations, welfare places, Skid Row. She wanted to get books to people. And during the Depression, she was eager to get how-to books to people for men to become plumbers and carpenters and everything. Really interesting lower level of her. But I wanted him to know all the amazing stuff about her. For instance, one of the librarians saw a little boy, not so little, I guess, 8 years old, sitting alone in the children's section of the downtown library. She initiated a children's section. I haven't been there before. And so this other librarian went up to the boy and said, hi, what's your name? And he said, Wellington Wilson. How old are you? 8. Well, where's your mama? Well, she just drops me off here and then she goes to work. Well, a little digging, they found out Mama was a prostitute and dropped him off at the library so he could be safe during the day. And she wasn't even the real mother. The real mother couldn't keep him and gave him to this other woman. So eventually, Gracia was interested in adopting this boy. Can you imagine? In those days, having a non-relative adoption, well, there was a legal battle, and she won. And that was one of the amazing parts. And another amazing part was she never married, and there are 2 possible reasons. She was engaged, or almost engaged, to a man who was a prominent geologist in this area. And they both went separate ways to go to college. Here's one story. When he came back, he had another woman on his arm, and she was wearing a wedding ring, engagement ring. So he had jilted her. The other possibility is she couldn't have children for reasons that are sketchy. I mean, even if somebody knew, it would be not cool to write down why she couldn't have children, if that's true. And she knew how much he loved children. So she said, no, you go find someone else because I can't give you children. All this good human stuff. I mean, wouldn't that be great in a play? You know, just one piece after, and stressing that she really developed libraries. Her ideas were taken across the country, and she became a big shot. But why wouldn't anybody think that would be a play? And listen to this. At the time the new library building was going up, there was a movement, me included, to try to get the library named for Gracia Countryman. Well, they didn't pick that. You know what they picked? It's a really enchanting name. Central. Central Library. And enough time had passed that there wasn't going to be any dirt dug up on her. My hometown, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, there was a Brownie Day Camp named Camp Evelyn Hieronymus. Well, Evelyn ditched her husband and remarried, and they took the name away. You know, but this was long enough ago that nobody was going to object to Gracia's name anymore. She was born on Thanksgiving Day. She was named Gracia, that means thanks. Middle name Alta, meaning high. And she always celebrated her birthday on Thanksgiving, even when it wasn't the date of her birth. But that's what all that meant to her. And what year was that? Oh, you would ask that. She was born the end of the 1800s. Yeah.
A bit earlier, because wasn't she at the university in the 90s? 1890s? I think so.
I think she knows. Yeah, I think it was, I'm sorry, it's gone already. I remember people, but I'm not too good on dates. I never would have been a historian because that's not the stuff I remember. I like all the good stuff, the people stuff. And that's what I got to write about in the newspaper too. Real people telling real things, and then subjects would say to me, well, this, and stop. Don't tell me if you don't want to see it in the newspaper. Because some of these people forget, you know, that they're talking to a reporter, and I didn't want to hear anything that I would have to make a judgment on whether this was part of the story or not. So that only happened a couple times. Well, should we cut this off? Well, thank you very much, everybody. You're a good audience.